The year was 2000, and the console gaming market was steadily on the rise. With the release of Sony's PlayStation 2, along with the release of the Nintendo GameCube and Microsoft's Xbox in the following year, it's safe to say that the market was at an all-time high. Well, at least it was in a lot of the world. In China, however, the console gaming market reached a roadblock. The global video game market as a whole leading up to the 2000s was steadily rising in popularity, and with that popularity came controversy. One such controversy of video games that is still brought to question today is the possibility of video games' effects on mental health, especially in children. The controversy was especially prevalent in China, and it, along with other reasons, pressured for a ban on console gaming. It wasn't until 2014 that the restrictions would be lightened and eventually removed entirely a year later. Chinese game developers finally had the console gaming market open to them, but many developers were accustomed to developing for mobile or PC and were afraid of stepping into unknown territory. That's not to say that no developers stepped up to the opportunity. In August of 2019, a game would be unveiled at the Chinese gaming expo ChinaJoy and would take the world by storm. Over 365,000 people gathered over a 4-day period at the Shanghai New International Expo Center to see 300 different exhibitors' new releases and announcements. Exhibitors included large names such as Tencent, NetEase, Intel, and Sony. Sony, having many of its consoles manufactured in China, was avidly supportive of new domestic companies in the console gaming scene, so it was no surprise to see Sony's adamant endorsement of a new multi-platform open-world title developed by a Chinese company. That title was MiHoYo's Genshin Impact. Upon reveal of the game, the selection of clips and gameplay shown was, needless to say, poor. The purpose of displaying clips that remarkably resembled gameplay from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was to garner the interests of people who enjoyed the aesthetic of Breath of the Wild, but instead it garnered a significant amount of backlash. Without actually exploring the other parts of the game that were different from Breath of the Wild, many attendees of the expo labeled Genshin Impact as a clone of Nintendo's game. A trend continued through the event where attendees would hold their copies of Breath of the Wild up to the Genshin Impact display with their middle fingers raised. One attendee even went as far as throwing his PS4 to the ground. It was something all too familiar. Just 1 year prior to the backlash against Genshin Impact, another company received similar backlash over the unveiling of a game.
Is there any plans to make this playable on PC, or is this just strictly mobile forever?
Are there any? The current plan is to be on mobile, both Android and iOS. We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
In Anaheim, California, a convention specifically for the game development company Blizzard, called BlizzCon, was held. At the event, one of the major announcements was a new entry, if you can even call it that, in the Diablo series. Blizzard partnered with the Chinese company NetEase to develop a mobile game that was allegedly set to be the next installment in the series. The backlash was relentless, and the hosts of the panel were on the receiving end of repeated booing from the crowd. It wasn't just the fact that it was a mobile game, but the fact that the gameplay appeared to be a retextured version of another game NetEase had previously released. I personally was there for the convention, and although I didn't let the announcement ruin my enjoyment, I still was very disappointed, mainly because I'm a huge fan of the Diablo series. I was even more disappointed after playing the demo, that made it clear that it was a clone of one of NetEase's other games. After the disaster that was Diablo Immortal, I became very apprehensive of games developed by Chinese companies. It was difficult for me to trust that Chinese games weren't just a clone of some other game another company had developed. That fact did not change when I first saw Genshin Impact. Even so, I decided to give the game a chance when it was released, and despite my apprehension, I can now say with confidence that MiHoYo is not like other companies such as NetEase or Tencent. In order to make a complete judgment on Genshin Impact as a whole, we need to go to the roots of the motto that MiHoYo was founded on: Tech Otakus Save the World. In the spring of 2011, 3 graduates from Shanghai Jiaotong University came together to form a game development company, calling it MiHoYo. The 3 graduates were not only friends, but they had a bond deeper than any other that was rooted in one simple commonality: the shared love for anime. They weren't just any college graduates, they were otakus. Although their bond was deep, the basis for it was a simple one. Likewise, the founding principle of the company, included in their first company profile, was also simple. Having faith in tech otakus save the world, MiHoYo is dedicated to create anime-style moe games and related products, saving our fellow believers by shaping a series of MiHoYo virtual idols. As ambitious as they were, beginning game development was not an easy task. Regardless, the group was eager to release their first title. In late 2011, MiHoYo reached its first major milestone in the video game industry by releasing its first game, a mobile game called Fly Me to the Moon. MiHoYo released it as a group of independent developers because the company was not yet officially incorporated. The credited development team for Fly Me to the Moon included the original 3 founders, independent game developer Kai Hao-yu, who had developed 2 indie titles before MiHoYo was founded, game producer Liu Wei, and game producer Yuhao Luo, along with 2 new additions to the company, an artist named Cici and another game producer named Jin Shicheng. Fly Me to the Moon was a humble beginning for MiHoYo, to say the least. It had extremely simple gameplay and mechanics. There wasn't an in-depth story or even a large amount of content like there is in more recent MiHoYo titles. The game used flight-based movements and basic mechanics similar to modern hyper-casual games, and it only had a few select modes with limited content. It did include an original character design, created by Cici, and some dialogue for the character as well as small pieces of lore throughout the dialogue. Although Fly Me to the Moon was a fairly dull game, the lore and character design paralleled the aspects of game design that MiHoYo is known for today. Those seeds were planted in Fly Me to the Moon, and they eventually blossomed into the complex lore and unique character designs found in MiHoYo's more recent titles. A year later, in 2012, the same development team that worked on Fly Me to the Moon launched a new game titled Zombiegal Kawaii, once again as a group of independent developers. Along with the launch of the game, they released a reveal trailer. The otaku side of the development team shined through in the overall style of the trailer. It was akin to the style and aesthetic of the opening to Persona 4 Golden on the PS Vita, which emphasized the inspiration the developers took from Atlus's game. Not only did the team take inspiration from Persona 4 when creating the trailer, but they also took inspiration from many other popular mobile games in the actual gameplay. Many features of the game were similar to Zombieval USA, a popular mobile game in the Western mobile market. Just like in Zombieville, Zombiegal Kawaii featured a linear 2D world in which the player could interact with destructible objects, kill zombies, and collect money to purchase new weapons that scale with the difficulty of the level progression. Not only did Zombiegal Kawaii have similarities with Zombieville USA, but it also had some with a game called Call of Mini Zombies, which was another popular Western mobile game. Instead of excluding a player level and having the player's weapons be the only thing scaling with the difficulty, Zombiegal Kawaii incorporated a character leveling system, just like in Call of Mini Zombies. There was also a co-op option for players to join each other and play levels together, just like in Call of Mini. This was the first project where MiHoYo took heavy inspiration from other games. It was also the first game where MiHoYo took concepts from multiple games and mashed them together into one, which is a common aspect of their more recent titles. Zombiegal Kawaii would be the testing grounds for a significantly larger project to be released that same year. Soon after Zombiegal Kawaii, MiHoYo released its first mobile game as a formally incorporated company, titled Houkai Gakuen. It was the first entry in the Houkai series, which was the series MiHoYo was most known for prior to the release of Genshin Impact. Taking the framework from Zombiegal Kawaii, MiHoYo developed their first fully online game that implemented a gacha system for character collection. With the gacha system came a cast of characters with original character designs and even some voice lines. 2 years later, in 2014, MiHoYo released the sequel to Houkai Gakuen called Houkai Gakuen 2. The game exploded in popularity and took the mobile game market by storm. Unlike Houkai Gakuen, the sequel had an even larger cast of original characters in the gacha system, including some characters from popular anime during crossover events, a storyline with an even heavier emphasis on lore and more character voice lines. Along with the release of the game, MiHoYo released a series of manga chapters that included side stories within the Houkai universe. This further developed the interest in the series, as it garnered more interest towards the unique story with well-developed and thorough lore. The game still used the same framework of mechanics and gameplay from the previous game and Zombiegal Kawaii, with only a select few new additions, and that framework was beginning to become outdated. It was clear to MiHoYo at this point that in order to continue in an innovative and revolutionary direction in the mobile gaming market, they would have to start with a blank slate. That same year, the company announced beginning development and research on a new project in the Houkai universe. Finally, in September of 2016, 2 years after its development was announced, the third iteration in the Houkai series was released, Honkai Impact 3rd. This game was not only like no other MiHoYo had developed, but it was also one of a kind in the mobile gaming market as a whole. MiHoYo turned away from the limitations of 2D gameplay that had constrained them for their past games, and instead developed Honkai Impact 3rd to include entirely 3D gameplay. The combat was MiHoYo's own unique spin on a hack-and-slash style. It also included the character switching mechanic, like there is in Genshin Impact. Just like the previous entries in the series, Honkai Impact 3rd of course incorporated the gacha system. The character designs were far more detailed, as they had to be modeled into a 3D environment. The voice acting of the characters was also of considerably higher quality, and was more extensive than any of MiHoYo's previous games. Not only that, but the game even had a completely original story that was consistent with the lore established in the previous 2 games. Just like with the release of Houkai Gakuen 2, Honkai Impact 3rd released alongside more lore-friendly manga chapters. To develop the Houkai universe even more, MiHoYo went as far as to release a series of CG animated videos on YouTube relating to the story of the game. In early 2019, MiHoYo announced development on a game that would be only loosely tied to the Houkai universe through a multiverse concept. The project was originally titled Original God Project while under development. It had a marketing budget of $100 million, which made it clear that this new project of MiHoYo's was going to be on an even larger scale than Honkai Impact 3rd. On September 28, 2020, the project released and became the Genshin Impact we all know and love today. Despite the backlash Genshin Impact received, I believe it to be the perfect representation of the idea MiHoYo as a company was originally founded on. A modest group of otakus coming together to create something out of their passion for anime and video games. But that begs the question, just how much inspiration and passion went into this project? During the first week of release, MiHoYo made its first impressions as a company that was curious in its player base and what interested them. Players were given the option to take a short survey in exchange for 50 Primo Gems. The survey aimed to identify what specific aspects of the game drew users in, especially users who had otherwise not heard of MiHoYo, which ended up being a vast majority of them. It included questions about what specific parts of the game were appealing, whether it was the extensive story and lore, the anime aesthetic, the gacha mechanics, or another part. What was intriguing about the survey was its repeated mentions of particular game titles. Surveyees were asked to identify what games from a list they had played, how many hours they had put into those games, and what they enjoyed about them. The 3 titles that appeared the most in those questions were Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, NieR Automata, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Those 3 titles, along with gacha systems and anime, are the most prevalent sources of inspiration for Genshin Impact. At first glance, one of the most obvious inspirations for Genshin Impact is anime. Not only that, but Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, NieR Automata, and especially Xenoblade Chronicles 2 all take inspiration from anime. It's only natural that Genshin would be inspired by anime. I mean, it was developed by a group of otakus. The anime inspiration doesn't end at the art style though. There are many points in the game that feature common tropes from anime, and many other characters are based on familiar anime archetypes. For example, main characters transported to another world against their will, main character meets a stupid and annoying insect that won't leave them alone no matter what. Well, maybe that isn't a trope, it just gives me Ocarina of Time flashbacks. Hey! Listen! Main character has a special aptitude that is not bounded by the rules others are bound by. Main character is screwed over by a deity. Main character is saved by a deity. Main character helps random people for not much in return. Main character has divine-like power. The list goes on. In terms of character tropes, we have the classic mature and very thirsty Ara One-san, the destructive lolly, the naive lolly, the maid, the badass and witty guy, the drunk, and of course, an anime is nothing without at least one femboy. That's not to say the tropes and archetypal characters necessarily detract from the overall game. Part of the reason the anime style is popular in games with anime fans is due to the fact that it has a sense of familiarity to it with the art style, characters, and story. The anime aesthetic also appeals to a wide audience, as the anime community is one of the most culturally, ethnically, and generationally diverse communities on the internet. After having experienced attempting the development of a couple different genres of games in the development of Fly Me to the Moon and Zombiegal Kawaii, along with having HoYo's experience in developing 2 other hyper-casual games, MiHoYo took a different approach in the development of Houkai Gakuen. As mentioned previously, the company used the framework from Zombiegal Kawaii when developing the base gameplay of Houkai Gakuen, but they added a new mechanic. This mechanic was steadily on the rise in popularity within the mobile gaming market for its addictive nature and its potential for profit. That mechanic was the gacha system. The term gacha originated from the capsule toy vending machines popularized in Japan. With video games, a gacha system refers to a randomized collection system, not unlike loot boxes, through which players can spend real money or in-game currency to obtain randomized characters or items in-game. The usage of a gacha system encourages players to roll for particular characters or items, usually on the basis of their preference for the character or item itself, rather than its actual viability within the game. Houkai Gakuen was a relatively successful game, in terms of not only profits, but also popularity, and its sequel was even more successful, which paved the way for MiHoYo to include the gacha mechanic in each of their following games. MiHoYo took inspiration from a trending mechanic in mobile games, and after it proved successful, they continued to implement it in future games. Aside from anime, the most obvious inspiration for Genshin Impact is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Genshin Impact draws a lot of aspects from Breath of the Wild. For one, Genshin uses cel shading to capture a similar comic book-like style that correlates with the anime-inspired art style, which is something Breath of the Wild is well known for using. Some of the monster designs are also remotely similar to those in Breath of the Wild, the most notable being the designs of the hilichurls that loosely resemble the designs of bokoblins. The hilichurl camps in Genshin also resemble the bokoblin camps in Breath of the Wild. Swimming and climbing are 2 mechanics in Genshin that work very similarly to their counterparts in Breath of the Wild. Just like in Breath of the Wild, Genshin has a stamina bar that depletes as the player climbs or swims. The player also has the option to jump while climbing or swim faster, with both sacrificing stamina efficiency for speed, which is the way it works in Breath of the Wild. Unlike Breath of the Wild, however, Genshin Impact does not hinder the player's ability to climb while it's raining, thank God. Just as well, many of the cliffs in Genshin have ledges that seem to be purposely placed to allow the player to regain stamina. It's almost as if the team at MiHoYo was playing Breath of the Wild and said, "Hey, this mechanic is pointlessly infuriating sometimes, so let's make it only slightly more bearable." A lot of the menus in Genshin Impact seem to be heavily inspired by the menus in Breath of the Wild. The inventory menu especially looks nearly identical to the one in Breath of the Wild. Another small mechanic that the 2 games share is cooking. Although Genshin's cooking is based on mastery with repeated attempts at cooking a recipe, whereas Breath of the Wild forces the player to learn recipes by experimenting with new combinations of ingredients. Genshin limits the player to only be able to discover new recipes through loot and quests. In Breath of the Wild, the player can increase their stamina or maximum health by bringing spirit orbs to goddess statues throughout the map. They can also reveal parts of the map by climbing to the top of Sheikah towers in different regions. Genshin Impact combined both of these aspects into one. The player can find Archon statues throughout the map to not only increase their stamina using collectibles like spirit orbs, but also to unveil new areas of the map. Genshin makes the cost of increasing stamina scale as the level of the statue increases, unlike in Breath of the Wild, where a new stamina vessel or a new heart container only requires 4 spirit orbs. Genshin Impact did take a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild, but with each aspect, MiHoYo altered them in a way that fit the other mechanics of the game. Breath of the Wild did not invent the open world, nor did it invent cel shading, or really any of the other mechanics that Genshin shares with it. The developers of Genshin played Breath of the Wild and saw something beautiful, so they attempted to capture that beauty in their own way, and they did a damn good job. The landscapes of Mondstadt really showed the amount of inspiration MiHoYo took from the beautiful and well-known landscapes in Hyrule. Liyue, on the other hand, appears to take inspiration from another game. Though the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was well written and engaging, the main part of the game that kept my interest was just how gorgeous it was. Something about being inside the body of a massive creature and looking at a huge cavern, or walking on the back of a titan and looking down at the endless abyss of the cloud sea below immersed me more than any other part of the game. My favorite area so far in Genshin Impact is definitely Liyue. Mondstadt has its own charm, but Liyue captures the exact same landscaping and vastness that immersed me when playing Xenoblade. In western Liyue, when I looked over the area around Huaguangstone Forest from Qingyun Peak, it was reminiscent of when I played Xenoblade and would look at the vastness of the cloud sea near the Leftharian archipelago. I remember when I first reached Qingyun Peak. I just stood there, taking in the view, spacing out into the fog below for several minutes, and immersing myself in the world. Another part of Xenoblade that I thoroughly enjoyed was the soundtrack. Throughout many areas of Xenoblade, I would spend a great deal of time wandering around and listening to the music. A lot of Genshin's music, especially in Mondstadt, takes inspiration from Breath of the Wild, but some of the tracks, for example, A Storm, A Spire, and A Sanctum, the theme for Storm Terror's Lair, sound similar to the music in Xenoblade. I've spent a lot of time in Storm Terror's Lair just to hear the music. MiHoYo also took inspiration from Xenoblade's focus on the importance of elemental interactions. Genshin features a lot of puzzles. Many of those puzzles require specific elements to complete. In order to open certain chests or do other actions in Xenoblade, specific blade field skills are required that sometimes pertain to the blade's element. Likewise, in both Xenoblade's and Genshin's combat systems, elements play a big role. In Xenoblade, elements are required to perform certain blade combos to deal more damage, and in Genshin, elements are needed to create interactions and ultimately deal more damage. Sometimes getting specific elemental interactions, whether in combat or in puzzles, it means having to switch characters. The elemental combos in Xenoblade require specific elements, which also requires the player to occasionally switch among 3 equipped blades in order to continue or complete combos. In Genshin, the player has to constantly switch among 4 characters based on elemental weaknesses and the environment around them, or based on requirements for puzzles. Xenoblade 2 is an entirely single-player experience, but a lot of the gameplay and mechanics feel like those of MMORPGs. From the fact that enemies are split among areas based around their levels, to the multi-layered combat, to the grindy late game, Xenoblade 2 feels a lot like a single-player MMO. Genshin has some of those aspects too. It does have the option for co-op, but Genshin is primarily a single-player game at its core. With the gacha system and the world level system, Genshin also feels a lot like a single-player MMO, albeit for different reasons. The final of the main 3 games that MiHoYo took inspiration from was NieR Automata. Genshin features 5 types of weapons for characters to use. It's a very limited arsenal, but combining all of those different types of weapons in combat is where the capabilities of the weapon types grow. The swords in Genshin are like the small swords in NieR, the claymores are like the large swords, and the polearms are like the spears. Not only are the weapon types similar to those found in NieR, but some of the attack animations also look similar. For example, the claymore charged attack in Genshin looks a lot like one of the animations for an attack with a large sword in NieR. Another aspect from the combat that Genshin took from NieR is the animation and mechanics involved with the dodge. Genshin's dodge and NieR's dodge both have invincibility frames in the earlier side of the animation, and the animations are also almost identical. The dodge mechanic also promotes an arcade-like combat style, in which the enemies will signal attack patterns through their animations, allowing the player time to react. The enemies in Genshin are extremely tanky. They have a lot of health in order to increase the duration of combat so that the player has more chances to experience and become accustomed to the attack patterns of the enemies. NieR also has a lot of enemies on the tankier side for the same reason that Genshin does. In summary, Genshin Impact is a mashup of all of these games and more into one package. I love all of the games that MiHoYo collected into Genshin, which makes the game all the more enjoyable for me. Genshin Impact is often misinterpreted as a copy of other games, but in reality it's a project inspired by the creators' passion for anime and games with that aesthetic. That's not to say the game is without its issues. To just scratch the surface of some of the issues, the gacha rates are unfair, the microtransactions are not worth it, the world leveling does not scale XP rewards, the late game is extremely grindy, the resource costs of Ascension are too high so that the resources cannot be collected by the time the world level catches up, and the co-op is disappointingly limited. There are a listless amount of other issues with the game, but what game doesn't have its flaws? Despite those flaws, when I look at Genshin, I see a revolutionary project of inspiration that I will always have high hopes for. At the end of the day, Genshin Impact is a project inspired by a collection of many different things. It's a project of passion that stemmed from the foundational ideals of a company with humble beginnings and a promising future. If any game were to represent what MiHoYo was all about, it would be Genshin Impact. A small group of tech otakus came together with a collection of inspirations from anime and video games, and combined those inspirations into a new game with a unique and in-depth story for those with similar passions to enjoy. According to MiHoYo's motto, tech otakus save the world. However, Genshin Impact is proof that these tech otakus not only save the world, but that their creations can make an everlasting and inspirational impact. You go. Okay. Oh wait, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, this is north. What? Where's north?
Oh my god, I had it.
It's like it doesn't want to go at a certain angle.
I thought I fell off and I was like, oh no.
Just stay right there.
Can't even get up. I'm stuck.
You're not sitting down on my screen, you're standing.
I am?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm still sitting. Glitch. Glitch.
Alright, son, hurry up and set.
Let's see how long I can screen for.
I can't wait to have the end credits just full of your uncontext screen.
I will hit this.
What the heck? I just mixed like... It looks like you almost hit it there. That's so weird.
Oh!
You hit it.
I got an achievement. Does he like it on your screen?
He just went like the complete opposite direction of both of us. What? He's just missing. What? How did he hit me?
Oh, my ping. It has risen.
What's it at?
300 and 400.
Oh. I'll let you host after this.
Hey, I think I got the ink.
Hold it down.
I almost got soft locked. Okay, there we go.